This is Twisted Passages with award-winning author Marie Sutro. Now, let's take a deep dive into the dark world of psychological thrillers and meet the authors who created them.
Hello, and welcome to Twisted Passages. I'm your host, Marie Sutro, and today we have Edgar Award nominated author Seraphina Nova Glass here to talk about her new release, Nothing Ever Happens Here. Welcome, Seraphina.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I can't wait to dive in because a lot was happening there. But before we do, can you kick us off with an overview of the story?
Yeah, so it follows three women, first-person perspective, and it takes place in a small northern Minnesota town. And I'm from Minnesota, and it's always a joke around here about how did I ever grow up there because I hate anything under 70 degrees. But I wanted to kind of go back to my roots, so I set it in kind of a rural northern Minnesota setting in the middle of the winter. There's three intertwining stories, and of course it all blends together. We find out how they're connected. Two of which are, well, it starts with a woman who has an unfortunate near-death sort of attack at the very beginning. And we're not sure how she survives and who attacked her. And she's sort of set on trying to figure out, she's trying to go on with her life and put it behind her, but figuring out what happened to her. And another woman whose husband is missing, and they're very close friends. And then we have a group of elderly folks at a retirement community who decided to insert themselves into the situation and get very involved in trying to figure these mysteries out in a roundabout way. They help and harm the situation, but they are certainly kind of take on a life of their own. And even though we're following the character Florence in the elder community, we sort of get to know all of them and all their little quirks and reasons for wanting to get themselves involved.
Yeah, Florence and her crew, I first have to say, are one of my most favorite things about this book. They are fun but deep characters. Each one is unique and brings a different skill to the team in different ways. And I had so much fun following them. But this isn't just a lighthearted story. And you really you interwove light and dark in so many spectacular ways.
Yeah, it's a very strange thing for me to kind of weave so much humor into thrillers. And I never really thought there was a place for that. When I first kind of pitched it, I figured, they're going to rein me in here. I'm thinking like I would talk, like I would think these people would speak in these situations. And then they sort of have this situational sort of humor within their conversations and quirks and sarcasm and the way they connect with each other. And it seems so natural in a sense as I'm writing it, but then I'm like, wait a second, this is a thriller and they're sort of funny. And I let that be, and it's not the first time I've kind of weaved that into a story. But you know what? I'm finding that's my voice. That's sort of just what comes. And so I'm letting it happen and now trying to pluck that out because it's supposed to be so serious.
And I loved that because the truth is that we're not all monochromatic people. Especially in group dynamics, there are those buddies that we have where it's the quips fly back and forth, and the quips fly whether it's sunny days or rainy days. Yeah. And to see that and to feel that beauty, and it relieves the tension as well, because there is a lot of tension in this story. The other thing I loved, obviously Florence is amazing, but she is one of, as you said, 3 points of view that we get. And those 3 points of view are distinctly different, yet very strong women. And they all kind of have their different takes on it. What was your inspiration for the 3 different ladies and the 3 different POV approach?
I really like multiple perspectives. I think, when I first started writing, the first 2 books were one character, first person. And then I discovered sort of just this in my 3rd book, On a Quiet Street, I play around with 3 perspectives. One of them is 3rd person, 2 of them are first person. And it just creates for me sort of a dimensionality that's richer and more interesting to get a story from multiple points of view, from somebody deeply in crisis and kind of fighting for their life, and somebody who's set a little bit apart, like Florence, who can view the situation a lot differently. And then Mac's situation is, again, even a little bit outside of that. She's dealing with her own problems and is set apart from the retirement community and the town a little bit. For me, it gives, eyes on all parts of the story. And I like it when a character can come in and start asking questions about a character we thought we knew so well. We see them in a different light because we're seeing them from someone else's perspective. And so I feel like it'd be almost hard to go back to a single perspective. I might try to challenge myself to do that, but there's sort of a freedom and excitement in this multi-perspective approach to writing. So kind of fallen in love with that a little bit.
I loved it because it was so natural, the different viewpoints, and each one was so important. You have two women who are kind of in the same age group, both working women, family women. But Florence, it's really fun within her group because her peer group is older. And sometimes what they're seeing is just so very different than those two younger characters. I loved looking at the character or looking at the plot and seeing it through their eyes and trying to unravel who's the most reliable narrator here.
And the time they have on their hands. They're not working, they're retired folks. And Florence is self-proclaimed at the beginning looking for a hobby. And she's like, gardening or this. Maybe I'll solve a murder, maybe I'll plant daisies, I'm not sure. So the fact that she's, looking for something to sort of stimulate her interest, and they kind of have the time to dig in where maybe, you have the working parents and somebody in crisis. They're not so much. It was really, really fun to play with all those levels.
And I got so vested in every single person. Obviously, the opening scene was so powerful. You really played with nuance, and it just grabs you by the heartstrings from the beginning and does not let go. My heart was in my throat the whole time thinking, oh my God, that happened. And now what's going to happen?
Good. It's always a plus.
One of the other things you touched on is that setting. It is beautiful. It is wintertime, exactly what we want for a thriller. It's going to limit where people can go, how they can get there. And you mentioned that you're from the area. So is the town that they mention an actual town that you've been to, or?
It's a made up place.
Okay.
And so I'm from the cities, I'm from Minneapolis. And I think there's nothing that scares me more than cold. And there's probably nothing I loathe more than winter. It's just, and I'm trying to find I'm on Pinterest finding posts about how to fall in love with winter, candles and fuzzy socks and tea. And I'm not really trying, even though I live in Dallas and it's not usually that bad here. So there's something to me very already ominous and scary about the cold and the limitations that they have with the snow and any storms you can kind of bring in. So I set it kind of near Brainerd, maybe somewhere between Brainerd and Fargo. I'm definitely familiar with that part of northern Minnesota as far as camping and spending time up there. But I always generally try to make my towns fictional because I can't go, I don't want to set them all in the same place. And I can't go and dig into the nuances of every town that I set my characters. And even if it's a big city I've spent time in, I think I get the facts wrong. And I want to be, authentic, but still have enough sort of wiggle room to create this, sort of fictional place that I can do with whatever my imagination wants without having to adhere to the realities of the city or something like that.
So it sounds like you wouldn't be moving to this town.
No,
it might be like a summertime visit. That's it.
Visit in the summer.
One of the other things I thought was interesting, the two women who are mothers, one of them has younger kids, and it's always so tough. It grabs your heartstrings even more, and the peril levels just rise exponentially when you think, what if these children could get embroiled in this? Was that difficult for you to even play with it, or did you know kind of where your boundaries were and you felt good as the writer because you knew and us readers are crying the whole time?
Well, I think so. I don't have kids, and I don't have and I have a lot of kids in stories in my books, and I can imagine, of course, being a parent, anybody you care for deeply, anybody in peril, anybody, my dog that I'm obsessed with, anybody, can imagine, put themselves in the situation of taking care of somebody young or vulnerable, of course, even if you don't have the firsthand experience. But, I always think kids getting hurt or getting killed in a story is kind of off limits. And I'm not somebody who's ever going to do blood and gore anyway. I love the domestic thriller, I think, for that reason. We get, we can get into like a really heart-pounding situation, and maybe there are some things that are sort of pointed to that are horrific and grotesque, but I'm never going to, go there. I don't think my psyche can handle that. I watched, a lot of that, and which is funny because my current project right now is a novella that's in the horror realm. But even with that, I still don't. I'm just not a graphic kind of person. So I think the kids, I definitely knew what the boundaries would be, but I think I just set that up as a part of what Shelby was going through, knowing that motherly instinct or maternal instinct that we all have probably a little bit of, and how much worse the situation was than if it were just her. That's all she was thinking about, even in the moments that she thought were her last. So kind of raises the stakes on it a bit, which is, it's fun. My mother's always like, how do you write this and not like aren't stressed out all the time? And I'm like, there's just something so different about knowing what's going to happen and being in control of it. So I can write a scene like that. I'm not bothered. I know I got control, rather than when you're reading it and you don't know what's going to happen. It's so very different, right?
Your heart is in your throat and you're like, oh my God, oh, what's the next sentence? I have to know. My mind is blown by someone who could weave humor so well in with that. Was it hard? Did you have to kind of manage the thriller pacing of it in order to allow for those moments, or did your characters just organically breathe for you in those places?
I think about pacing a lot, and I think probably because we talk about reviews and whether or not it's good for your mental health to even look at them or not, right? And I usually don't, but when a new book's coming out, I look at them quite a lot. And I feel like I could literally lose my mind looking at one review that said it's slow pace, slow burn. And the next one's page turner, fast paced. Next one, slow burn. If you like character-driven, slow thrillers, this is for you. If you want to have a nail-biting edge your seat thriller, this is for you. I'm like, which one is it? I don't know. Nobody else knows. It's so, and you can't chase, what other people want, or, kind of try to force it into something that it's not. And so it's an interesting question. And I don't know. What I think about most is trying to end each chapter with a bit of a cliffhanger, because you're going to switch perspectives. You have these three women and they go in order. So it's, it's Shelby, it's Mac, it's Florence. And as soon as something crazy happens in Mac's story, bam, you're switching back to Shelby's story. And it kind of pisses some people off. They're like, but wait, I'm just invested in this and you switched on me. I'm like, well, that's a good thing if you feel that way, probably, if you're invested enough to want to keep, going with that part of the story. So I do think of it holistically. I do outline everything, and I try to keep that stuff in mind. But once I know sort of how I'm going to end that chapter and what those little cliffhangers are going to be, then yeah, the characters, to me, there's a freedom in letting the characters breathe and just being able to play with the interactions. And that one chapter, as long as I know where I'm going with it, I really do get to let the characters kind of just show me their personalities, I guess, a little bit.
They do. Every one of them shines. I was curious because I was looking into your bio a little bit, and I was curious how much kind of your academic background, do you feel that a lot of that kind of comes up and bubbles up through these domestic thrillers?
I feel like I say this, a lot of people are probably sick of hearing me say this, but playwriting to me, if my background is playwriting, is like classical training for becoming any other kind of writer. I think it's so much harder to me. I just respect playwrights so much because you're really stuck with a small stage without a lot, with language being, sort of the main driver in a story, without a lot of opportunity for scene changes or for, multiple characters. If you want to get produced anyway, they always say keep it under 6 characters these days for stage plays. And so when you come from that world where dialogue and language is really driving the story along, and you're usually working with Baroque theaters that can't even barely have a set, let alone beautiful scene, all this stuff. And then you look at the freedom of writing a novel where you can meander and create worlds and characters and change a scene every 5 seconds if you want to. It seems to me, and writing's never easy, but it just seems easier. It was almost like, wow, there's this whole other kind of, literary world that I can explore. And so I just kind of fell in love with it because it's not collaborative. and there's nothing wrong with that. But when you hand over your baby and then there's 1,000 other people, directors and actors and scenic designers and lighting designers, putting their spin on it and doing with it, sort of what they will. I love the control that I have as a novelist, and I love sort of the freedom of being able to create sort of a bigger world of the story, writing novels. But certainly I think that background was so helpful in kind of all of a sudden deciding just a few years ago to write fiction. I mean, it's still, I know it's 2020, I debuted in 2020, and it still feels really new to me. I still feel like the new kid on the block, even though I'm going on book 8, but it's all very surreal still, I think. And I don't even know, some days I don't think it's, all right, this is what I do now.
Well, I can say, as for the reader population side, we're very glad it's what you do.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. I think about, as my agent once told me that, I think one of the guys in the agency that acquires books for film said, the reason that thrillers are so hard to sell to film is because they're almost always like in one place. There's not a lot, and I never really noticed that, but I think it would be a talking heads if you really kind of brought it onto the screen in many of them, I guess. And I never thought about that before. And when she said that, I'm like, yeah, I could see that being the case. And so I guess there's a part of me that does think about how, really envisions it, really visualizes the whole scene and wants to make sure, God, if we're still going to be talking about this, let's at least move to the car, or like, let's, be walking through the woods. I don't know, to try to keep the visualization moving along so you can really see it play out instead of it just getting so conversational. And yeah, so I do think about that too. So I appreciate you noticing that.
Well, one last thing I do have to ask you, because there is considerable peril and some really dark themes in this, what do you do for fun?
Oh, wow. Well, no one ever asks me that. It's really interesting. I'm so not dark. I watch baking shows and garden and take long dog walks in the sunshine and meditate and make green juice. I'm like a hardcore vegan. I'm really into the whole health kick and green smoothies. I'm very sort of sunshiny in real life. And so when I was actually thinking about this last night, I'm like, I think it's so funny that I write through. I mean, if you knew me, you wouldn't really think I'd be a person writing thrillers, I guess. Yeah, I mean, my husband's just about to join me for a yoga and Reiki class after this. We kind of just do a lot of that, I don't know, the sort of the self-development, relaxation, fitness kind of juice world, I guess you could say. So I think that's kind of, what I'm doing outside of writing books.
So we don't have to worry envisioning all the darkest things every day.
People always ask him if he's scared, do you think you might get poisoned with antifreeze one day? But no, he's actually really helpful when I'm calling him and saying, hey, if how long do you think it would take for a body to dissolve in a vat of acid or something? And he's so used to me now, he'll just be like, let me think. So yes, there's some strange conversations going on, but no, it's not. I don't live, eat, and breathe thrillers, right? It's a job, and it's fun to have your full-time job be creating, ways to murder people. It really is. But when you know it's going to happen and you don't really lean too heavily into the blood and gore of it, I think you can keep a very balanced life outside of it.
Well, I am so glad to hear, and I'm sure listeners will be glad to hear, that anyone who gets invited to your house, if green juice is offered, it's literally like green organic juice.
Yes,
it's not anything worse.
Yes. Promise.
Okay, perfect. Well, again, Seraphina, amazing read. Before we wrap up, for your existing fans and all the fans that are going to find you, where is the best place for them to know what's coming?
I'm old, so I'm active on Facebook, like apparently old people are, versus TikTok or Instagram or the others as much. So Seraphina Nova Glass is just so easy to find because I'm the only one that I know of with that name. So if you Google that into Facebook or Instagram or anything, I'm easy to find. I think I'm Seraphina Nova Glass on both Facebook and Instagram. I try to keep up with Instagram. And my publisher is good at tagging me in upcoming things. And then I have a website, seraphinanovalglass.com. So any of those places are good ways to kind of find out what's upcoming.
Outstanding. The title is Nothing Ever Happens Here, but again, so much happens in the pages of this book. Thank you so much for a wonderful read, Seraphina, and thank you for joining me today.
It was great to be here.
And thank you all for joining us on this episode of Twisted Passages. We hope to see you next time.